I want to welcome everyone, and first of all, I would like to present myself. My name is Elena Dumitru. I am the local president of JCI Constanța, Romania, and the trainer for JCI Mongolia Academy in Romania, being one of the first generation graduates of the Train the Trainers program created by JCI Mongolia Academy in Romania. Of course, I'm here to learn alongside everybody. The series are focusing on tapping into the expertise of JCI members all over the world. We are planning to organize 2 training sessions every month that are addressed to all JCI members, focusing on delivering essential information and skills for JCI leaders and future local, national, and international leaders. This session will be conducted by JCI Senator Diana Mardarovici, a distinguished economist, JCI Partnership Director, and General City Councillor for Bucharest, the capital city of Romania. Diana has chaired and participated in numerous meetings and has years of experience in applying parliamentary procedures at all JCI levels, as well in corporate boards, city councils, and in events of the European Union Committee of the Region. Diana, thank you again for accepting the invitation, and the floor is yours.
I feel very special after so many words were spoken about me. I don't know how amazing I am until somebody introduces me, so I appear to be very knowledgeable. So thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to talk to you. It's a pleasure to be here. This whole idea of the training appeared from a conversation with my friend Christina. We were discussing the challenges that we all face when running effective meetings. And we were discussing how we can improve the knowledge that we all have, because it is a pleasure for me during these trainings to learn from you. It might be possible that I don't have the answers to all of your questions. I know I'm not all-knowing or omnipresent or omnipotent, unfortunately, but I do have a lot of experience, and we can figure out things together. And if I don't know an answer to one of your questions, I know who to ask because I do have my own mentors. So we'll figure it out together. To talk about the course objectives for today, there are several things that we want to approach. We want to approach the fundamentals of parliamentary procedures, why they're necessary in general, because I know a lot of you in your local chapters where there are not that many members, some of you have hundreds, and then parliamentary procedure is mandatory, but especially the smaller local chapters, they don't want to formalize themselves. Why do we need all of these rules? So this is one of the things that we will discuss today. Why should small and big local chapters run their meetings according to parliamentary procedure? We will understand how meeting management is done. The original course had also master meeting management. Let me tell you, nobody masters meeting management until they do a lot of meetings. So for the mastering part, training won't help you. You just need to do it in practice. And how to empower inclusive decision making. That basically means making sure everybody has a chance to voice an opinion and to promote democratic practices. It is many times that people don't have a problem with the decision as much as they have a problem with how the decision was made. And we need to make sure that in our organization, people feel heard and acknowledged. And even if the decision that is ultimately taken is not the decision that they supported, they do feel like it was done in a democratic way. Now, let's get to know each other. This is not going to be mandatory for everyone. Nothing in this training, by the way, is mandatory, as is nothing in JCI mandatory, not even being a member. But what I would really appreciate is your engagement, because if we engage together, then we will be a lot more successful and we will learn from each other. So I will give the floor. You can just raise your hands and let me know who wants to speak. I would want your name, country, local chapter, and how long you have been a member of JCI. So who wants to go first? Okay, now that we have introduced ourselves a little bit, I want to ask if you, in your personal experience through the years, have ever experienced an unproductive meeting? And what about that meeting made it ineffective? What was the problem with your experience with unproductive meetings? So the purpose of parliamentary procedure is to avoid those situations. And as I was saying in the beginning, in my experience, going as a vice president all around Europe, I understand that smaller organizations feel like this is very antiquated. And I know that Gen Z doesn't like formal stuff. And I understand that. But running things by the rules, even a more simplified procedure of the big rules, keeps everybody on the same page and avoids conflict. Whenever conflict arises in a local organization, my advice is go to the Constitution. Make sure you go to the Constitution. Look at the Constitution. Did you run the meeting orderly? Because this is how you will avoid in the future to have interpersonal conflict. And this is actually how we do things at a city council level or in a parliament or wherever a decision is made. So the purpose of parliamentary procedure is to, first of all, keep meetings orderly, to make sure that decisions are made by a majority, to make sure that the minority has a voice and that it is protected, ensure everybody an opportunity to speak. This ensures overall for fair decisions. It refers to what I was speaking at the beginning of this session about how people might not have a problem with the decision that was made, but with the way that a decision is made. And I'm sure many of you know the quote of the end justify the means. Let me tell you one thing. It never does, in my experience, because if the means that you use are not correct, are not right, what will happen is that the goal will also be corrupted, basically. So, you know, they say that I'm going to give you the example of Robin Hood. Robin Hood is a wonderful story, but he was a criminal who stole to give to the poor. So, although it's a wonderful story when you think about it for, you know, from a romantic perspective, but if you put in yourself in the situation of being the person that things are stolen from to be given to somebody else, you will see that that is not necessarily the most noble thing to do. So make sure when we do go through parliamentary procedure that you have the ability to put yourself in everybody's situation, to put yourself in the situation of the chair, to put yourself in the situation of somebody from the majority, and also to put yourself in the situation of the minority. So initially, the famous Robert's Rules of Order that everybody quotes, that our parliamentary procedures from JCI were inspired from, were basically drafted by a general because he had to run a church meeting and he didn't know how, so he felt embarrassed. So he decided to never join a meeting again without having a clear, very, very clear structure. So this is when he drafted on his own, he took it upon his own to draft a set of rules that would make meetings go as efficiently as possible. And it hasn't, it's amazing. These rules have not fundamentally changed since 1876. So these rules were made before phones were there, but we still use them because they work. When do you think we should use parliamentary procedure? Should you use them in big meetings or in small meetings? So let me tell you one thing. If it's a project meeting, so for example, we're just meeting to decide on a project, how to run it and who's going to be the PM and who does what. Do you think we should apply parliamentary procedure? it really depends on what the meeting is about. If you guys are just there to team build and to have maybe a drink building, maybe, play, play games or just do something as a social activity, of course you're not going to do it by parliamentary procedure. But if you will be, as Elena said earlier, taking any decisions during that meeting, it is really recommended that you always run it by parliamentary procedure. Of course, a simplified version of it, but it is good to do it. One reason is this, and this is something that happened to me. So I'm a red, I'm a fire with yellow. I'm a very extroverted person and I'm overpowering. I can be extremely domineering. So in a meeting, I'm very convinced that I'm right and I hold the answer to all the problems. So I tend to dominate other people, and the people that are quieter, the people that are more introverted, those people don't necessarily have bad ideas. They just need to be given the space to give those ideas, to voice those ideas. So usually in a JCI meeting, whether it's a project meeting or a local chapter meeting, you will have people with different personalities. What you want to avoid is not having the best idea on the table just because you allowed for two rowdy, firestorm people to take over the meeting. You want to make sure, as a leader especially, that you gave everybody a chance to express their thoughts. And this is why, even in smaller meetings, if decisions are made, it is really important to apply parliamentary procedure. Also, if you have a meeting where you do think that there will be conflict, and when I say conflict, I don't necessarily mean it in a negative way, because conflict can be good. Conflict is a part of teams. We don't avoid conflict at all costs. Sometimes that can actually hurt the organization. But when you do think that there will be things that will be discussed and debated, it is very good to apply parliamentary procedure, because there's a clear order of how we do this. So we will avoid people being hurt and people getting personal. And when the right to speak or decide must be protected. As I was saying earlier, in a democratic society, the majority will ultimately make the decisions for everyone. But what makes a democratic society different, or a decision democratic as opposed to autocratic or dictatorial, is that minorities have a right to speak. So somebody who thinks differently needs to be heard, because otherwise what you will find, you will have a first meeting, and that happened when I was local president. So you will start your year with 15 people on the board. You will have the meetings. You will have the meetings with the people that agree with you. 2-3 people didn't have a chance to speak, but doesn't matter. The other people are on board, so you move on. For the next meeting, only 12 people will show up, because the other 3 people weren't heard, so they didn't feel involved. So they're kind of, oh, I don't need this in my life. So for the next meeting, you're going to have 12 people show up. And again, you're going to have a conversation without any structure, and you're going to end up involving only 8 people in that meeting. But never mind, 8 is more, 8 is a majority, so you don't need all 12. Excellent. For the next meeting, you'll end up with 8 people attending. And you will find out by the end of your year that it's going to be you and 2 of your best friends doing everything. And you don't want that, because that's not how we run effective projects, effective local organizations, and effective national organizations. For the modules of this meeting, we will discuss the meeting itself, the players, the motions, the rules, and how the voting goes. For the meeting, what is the most successful part of the meeting? Can anybody tell me? So the most important part of a meeting to make it successful is that agenda. It is the structure. It is the backbone. It tells everybody that is going to attend that meeting why you're meeting. And that is extremely important to have. And I would recommend agendas don't be as wide as, oh, let's get together and decide what we're going to do next year. That's a bit wide. If you want to have a successful meeting, make sure that you allocate time in your agenda and you're very clear that not only are we talking about what we're going to do next year, but the first point is going to be number one, how much money we have. Number two, how are we going to get more money? So don't just discuss generally wonderful ideas without a clear structure of the order to discuss them. And that is given in an agenda that has to be prepared in advance. It doesn't have for smaller meetings, it doesn't have to have all the usual structure, but it should at least have 3 points. So one of the things that we must keep in mind is only discuss what is on the agenda. How many times did it happen to you, because most of you are leaders with experience, to have a meeting completely overturned by somebody who wants to discuss something completely different? And they feel like right now is the great time that everybody's there, is the great time to do that, right? So I'm sure it happened to everyone. Make sure when you create expectations that people understand we can only discuss meetings on the agenda. Can you, because people will be frustrated if you limit the subject. Can you tell me how you can also open the floor to other things not on the agenda? Include on the agenda a point that says miscellaneous. So just include at the end of the agenda. I recommend it to be at the end of the agenda. Otherwise, the meeting can go everywhere. A point that says other items or miscellaneous, or you call it what you want. So the reason that's important is, especially when you're trying to run a meeting, you don't let somebody overcome everybody else and take the meeting and the conversation in the direction that they want. People usually come to discuss what was on the agenda. So you don't let people basically hijack your meeting. If you say, okay, no problem, we can talk about your idea a little bit later on, let's get through the first points. And of course, we will discuss this idea as well. So make sure you include that, because people will feel like they need to bring more to the table than was already included on the agenda. Also, one great way to do it, what I personally use, I send the agenda to the people meeting and I say, this is my proposal. Please send your proposal by this time. So if you miss the deadline, then I'm sorry, it's not going to be discussed during that meeting. Also, my suggestion to you, and I've been in meetings that lasted 8 hours or 10 hours, don't have too many points in the agenda. So don't be overly optimistic about how much time you need. Specify the agenda topic to be discussed. So when you're running the meeting, make sure you're saying, we are on point 1. We are now discussing, for example, the budget. The idea is make sure everybody's on the same page and you all know where you're, in what point of the agenda you are. For example, one of the things that we use is, of course, presentation, like we are here. Everybody knows what we're discussing right now because we have a PowerPoint. You can do the same with the agenda to have the clear, if you have a projector or if you have a laptop computer, to have a clear slide that lets everybody know what you're discussing at that moment. When should you send the agenda for our best meeting for the General Assembly? So according to the Robert's Rules of Order, it should be 30 days in advance. Now, keep in mind one thing, that you guys should go according to your constitution. Usually in your constitution, it clearly states when you have, what's the deadline for the agenda. So if something is not mentioned on the constitution, you apply Robert's Rules of Order. But this should be mentioned in your local or national organization constitution. I think this is the case for everyone. And also give a clear deadline when sending the agenda for people that want to add items to the agenda when they should do it. The usual agenda items for JCI chapters is this: the welcome speech, usually done by the chair. Invocation, you know what invocation is? Is the JCI creed. And it is, of course, optional. But I feel like having the JCI creed before meetings grounds everybody a little bit in our values and reminds everyone why we are there. So of course, you're not going to have this when you do a project meeting, you're probably not going to have this, but when you have a local organization, a GA, I fully recommend to do this because this reminds everyone why they're there. So reminds of the values we have. The next one is the mission, vision, and values. Also, it is up to you if you do it, but the JCI structure and at an international level, this is how it's done. Then if you don't have a secretary already, a secretary general of your local organization, a secretary general of your national organization, or if you don't have a secretary for that meeting, that's when you appoint one. Can anybody tell me what a secretary of a meeting does? They actually run the show. My favorite position in JCI was when I was secretary general in my local chapter, because I always viewed the position of secretary general as Kofi Annan secretary general, not, you know, here's your coffee secretary. So you're actually the prime minister of that meeting. So you have the chair who's the president and you're the prime minister. You do roll call, you make sure everybody follows rules, you can make sure, you know, to keep people in order, you make sure the conclusions are drafted by you. So there are a lot of having a good secretary for a meeting is essential, because this is how you don't end up with meeting minutes that make no sense on 50 pages with different types of spacing, and you have to chase around information. So the secretary is very important, because once you've had the meeting, you will also have a written document of the meeting, and that written document needs to be prepared by a very professional person. Then the agenda should have the roll call and then the quorum. The quorum is basically when you recognize the number of people present, and if you do can proceed with decisions. Scrutineers, who knows what a scrutineer is? The scrutineers, yes, of course, the chair and the secretary can't follow how voting is going everywhere. So they need to appoint people that also make sure that the voting is done according to the rules, especially when you have a secret vote. So this is the role of the scrutineers. Make sure when you appoint scrutineers that they are also from the minority position. So if you don't want the vote counting or the process to be challenged, make sure that when you appoint scrutineers, they also are from the position, so to speak, opposition, the other side of the decision, the people who have the minority votes, just so that it is clear, it is transparent, and nobody thinks that elections were manipulated. Then you have the approval of the agenda and the approval of minutes of the last meeting. So how does the approval of the agenda happen? Exactly, the motion. A motion is an action. We need to have a motion to get anything done. So there's a motion that happens to approve the agenda. Any people that want to add points to the agenda can start, you know, discussing and adding points. And then the motion is proposed by a member, it is seconded. If there are no discussions, the motion is voted. And we will talk about something that is very interesting. I've noticed that it's a lot harder than it seems. The call to order, the presence. in certain country that is called. How is that done properly? Can anybody tell me? It's quite easy, but people mess it up. So make sure you do it in the following way. The secretary of the meeting has a list of everybody who has the potential of voting. So not the people, they have not a list of the people present, but of the everyone who has a right to vote. They go calling each person by their name, and that person has to say present, correct? So they go through the whole list, and then they count the number of people present and the number of people absent. You always do this before any GA. Don't do it later. This is how you start before anything else. I'm saying this because of having the experience of people saying, in the middle of a lot of discussions, we don't really have a quorum. So make sure you open with this. Also, this is once you do the presence, you can declare the meeting open and you start your meeting per se. What is the purpose of a quorum? Why do we need that? Also to make sure that the people making the decision have the right to make that decision. Otherwise, maybe 10 of us get together, make a decision, and then inform the other 50 people what we've decided for them, right? So to avoid things like that happening, this is why you have the quorum rule and the purpose of the roll call. Now, I will ask you something extremely interesting, and that is the voting schedule. And that applies to national organizations and to international organizations. Can anybody tell me what a voting schedule is? You have to decide at the beginning of the meeting what kind of voting schedule you will be going on. And there are two types of voting schedules. One is by the voting strength, as you mentioned, and that is calculated according to a formula, or in the national constitution, it's mentioned. Each organization has a number of votes according to the constitution. That is one voting schedule. The second voting schedule is one member, one vote. Are you aware of that voting schedule? One vote per member? When do we use it? One at an international level, one vote per member. During conference assemblies, we use the schedule one vote per member. During the GA at World Congress, we use always, that's not optional. We use voting strength. So those are two different voting schedules that you can implement in a meeting. Election meetings, as you mentioned, Andrea, when you elect your officers, the GA, that needs to be on voting strength. My question to you is, can you change the voting schedule during a meeting? So on certain issues, vote with one schedule, and on other issues on a different schedule. You cannot change the voting schedule during a meeting. It's either one member, one vote, or voting strength. You don't pick and choose, and you don't mix it up, okay? The quorum ensures the minimum number of members are present at the meeting for the meeting to be done constitutionally. Now, that doesn't mean if you get together and you don't have a quorum that you can't have a meeting or a conversation. You just can't make decisions. You can discuss the issues together, you can go through the agenda, but you cannot vote on anything. So if the purpose of the meeting is to make a decision, if you don't have a quorum, go home. What is a quorum? So for example, what percent is how do you consider that a meeting has quorum? What is the percentage? So the standard in parliamentary procedure is 50% plus 1. Now, can anybody tell me what is 50% plus 1 from 25? I'm going to give you a math question. So if a local organization has 25 members, what is their quorum? So according to the rules is 12.5. So 50% is 12.5 plus 1, that makes 13.5. So quorum is 14. 50% plus 1 doesn't mean that you can subtract half a person. You round up up. You always round up. You never round down. 50% plus 1 is plus 1 whole vote. So the quorum for 25 is actually 14. The reason we have rules is so we do not have philosophical debates. The rules that we apply for our organization are parliamentary procedure and in the Constitution. If parliamentary procedure says a decision is taken by 50% plus 1, and the voting strength of one organization is 50% plus 1, those are the rules. And yes, that organization can make that decision. If somebody has more members, they should have more to say. But you have schedules. So if you have a GA or an assembly where you don't elect something, you may go by the voting schedule of one organization, one vote, so that everybody feels more included. But during elections, you cannot do that, because the organization that has the largest amount of vote also contributes financially the most, and they do a lot of work. So that is kind of the reason you have that. Okay, the quorum rules. How many minutes do you have to wait for a quorum? So let's say you have a meeting of 25 people, quorum is 14. You're there for 5 minutes and only 10 people showed up. How long do you wait? I've had 6 city council meetings where the mayor waited for almost an hour. According to the rules of Robert's rules, it's 15 minutes that Christina mentioned. You wait for 15 minutes. If you don't have the people necessary to have a quorum, you go for a different meeting. But otherwise, you can put it in your Constitution. If you want to wait for an hour, that's okay, but I don't think it makes sense for everybody. The roll call procedures are clear. We have discussed them. The meeting starts once quorum is achieved. One thing that you must be mindful of, sometimes people will come in and run out of meetings. Make sure the secretary takes note of that. And if the quorum changes and if the majority changes, they announce it. Why is that important, you think? So let's take a situation of having 25 members and quorum is 14. Let's say at the beginning of the meeting, you have 20 members present. So majority vote is 11. And in the meantime, things change and only 14 people are in the meeting. Majority vote is 8. If you vote on something and you only have 8 votes, if the secretary didn't change the quorum, didn't notice that the quorum changed, a motion will not pass, although it should. And the same happens for the other way around. If you start the meeting with 14 and 20 people show up for a certain decision, make sure you mention that the quorum has changed and the new majority. For the annual General Assembly, the 50% plus 1 rule doesn't apply, and you will usually have it in your national constitution. What the quorum is. Some organizations have 30%. I know JCI International has 30%. 30% of voting strength you need to run a General Assembly at World Congress. For General Assemblies at a national and international level, you will have a different quorum than 50%. The reason is simple. Things happen and sometimes you're not able to have a meeting with so many people, and you don't want the organization to be stuck because people cannot travel or something happened. And you will have that situation concerning what we were discussing earlier. 30% of people will decide for the whole organization, the 30% that show up. And it's not 30% of people, mind you, it's 30% of voting strength. So that means JCI Japan, JCI India, and 2 more countries can make the decisions for everybody if others don't show up. This is why we always have to show up for World Congress. I'm not saying they would make a bad decision, but our voices should be heard even if we're small. The chairperson has certain duties, and I know as a national president, past national president, as a local president, it's very, very hard to follow this rule because you do have an opinion. My advice to leaders is make that opinion heard before your meeting. During the meeting, have a neutral tone, because otherwise you can seem to be intimidating and you can seem to be overpowering. So the actors of the meetings are the chairperson and the members. And then the members can have and voice their opinions as they see fit, but also they have some rules to follow. For the chairperson, the meeting dues are to promote participation. If you're a chair and you see that somebody is not speaking for the whole meeting, ask for an opinion. Make sure everybody's heard. So there's a thing about silent majorities. Don't assume if somebody's being silent that they agree with you. That's the biggest mistake I've ever made. I thought people that are silent clearly see my point. No. Make sure you hear everybody's opinion, because you might have a surprise at the vote. And keep discussing on the topic as long as you see that is relevant without people starting to repeat themselves. And ensure fair voting for everyone. Meeting don'ts. Don't impose your point of view. I know you're a leader. I know you are. I am one as well. It's very hard to do. But what I do is I breathe, I step back, and I remember that this is not my organization. I am actually their representative. So it is not that I lead where I want and they follow. It is that they show me where they want to go and I represent them. Please remember this position of power. The power will always be with local organizations. The power needs to be on the ground level with the member, with the local organization, and never with the structures above. So you are there to hear their decision and to your best ability represent. Of course, you have experience, you have a voice, you can voice that opinion before, but try not to impose a point of view. It is not your organization, it's theirs. Don't allow members to dominate. As I was saying earlier, there are certain personalities people don't mean. I'm telling you from that's my excuse. I don't necessarily mean badly when I overpower a meeting, but there are certain personalities. Make sure you are a chair. You can stop that. Not in a rude way, but say, okay, we've heard your point of view. Can we move over? You will have an opportunity to speak again once everybody else has spoken. Don't allow personal attacks ever. I have suspended meetings for that. Do the same. It is never okay. Ever okay to bully people, never okay to insult people, never okay in JCI to make people feel bad about themselves. And don't close discussions too early. So if a discussion is going and you want to go to lunch, it's not okay to close it if people don't feel like they have spoken their opinions. The members' mistake. I know people sometimes feel like they haven't been heard and feel like they have to say the same thing over and over again. If you made one point once, it's not necessarily to repeat it ad nauseum. Don't speak out of order. So if the rules of this meeting, like I told you, so at this meeting, you can just unmute yourselves to speak, or you have to raise your hand and I'll recognize you. If these are the rules, we all follow those rules. It is not okay to go out of order. Don't try to impose your point of view. Accept that other people can see things differently. Don't be aggressive and ironic. That is something I have a lot of trouble with. But as a general rule, we should not be aggressive and ironic, because those meetings are meant to carry all of us forward, not to show each other how much of a smart ass we can be. What's a motion? We discussed this earlier. A motion is meant to take action. What does that mean? Well, if there were no motions, we would have on the agenda discussion of the budget. We would discuss the budget, and then what? A motion is what takes the meeting forward. So, okay, after everybody exhausted their point of view, then you put a motion on the floor to accept the budget. That is what motion means, because I know a lot of people ask me what's the difference between a motion and an agenda point. A motion is an action. An agenda point is a discussion. Why do we need a seconder for a motion? Why do we need somebody to second motions? So if I want to get something done that nobody else, not even, as Christina said, not even one person in that room feels the same, maybe the whole General Assembly shouldn't waste their time with this. So a seconder means somebody else thinks this is relevant. It doesn't necessarily mean that that person is in favor. So for example, if somebody says, okay, I move to end this debate because I had enough. The person that seconds the motion doesn't necessarily mean that they also want to end the debate. They might just feel like they want everybody to express their opinion on it and vote, okay? So if you seconded a motion, that doesn't mean that you need to vote for it. It's not mandatory. And also that ensures that the time you spend in the meeting is spent on relevant topics. Some of you may know this. How many of you have had the chance to serve this organization as an elected officer? So motions are divided into categories, and it's really important to understand the different type of categories, because depending on the category that a motion is, it has a different rules of putting it in action. A main motion proposes a new topic. It proposes a clear action. A privileged motion is an urgent matter. Can anybody give me an example of a privileged motion? If I have to go to the toilet, that's a privileged motion, but that's not a normal main motion to recess. That's a privileged motion, because if I am chairing the meeting, the meeting can't go on. So, this is an example of what kind of an urgency it has to be. Otherwise, it's a main motion. It has to wait its turn. But if something happened like that, like I really need to go to the toilet, or, I don't know, maybe somebody's calling me and it's so urgent that I have to leave, or things like that, it has to be truly urgent. And usually it doesn't need voting. It doesn't need a seconder. A subsidiary motion is related to the main motion. Can anybody give me an example? Yes. Also, one of the ways to do a subsidiary motion is, for example, if somebody wants to vote on the budget with certain conditions, the certain condition is a subsidiary motion or an amendment. The motions, I think I don't know which JCI president explained this to me. Motions are like an open book. I don't know. This is killing me. Okay. So they're like an open book. You have to close everything inside before you close the main motion. The main motion is the big guy. So before you close the main motion that we're discussing, all the subsidiary and smaller motions need to be closed. So until you've decided on the subsidiary motion, you can't move to the main motion. And then the incidental motions. The incidental motions are related to the rules of the meeting itself, such as parliamentary procedure or the Constitution. A main motion proposes a new topic or a new action, and it must be seconded before it's discussed. It cannot be proposed while another motion is being discussed. It is the book rule. So until we finish discussing this, we're not opening a new discussion. This is not done, never, niet, nada, no. Because then you're going to have a mess of a meeting. So if we are discussing, for example, opening a new local organization, you first discuss the motion to recognize or to give them the status of new local organization before you move forward to discussing, I don't know, the budget of the organization in general. So make sure you close a motion before you open another one. It always gives preference to a privileged, subsidiary, or incidental motion. It's what I told you. First, you need to solve all the things inside of a main motion before you can close the big topic. First, you clarify all the related motions. Let's have an example. I propose that we use part of the administrative expenses budget to cover the cost of the registration for our national president to the national convention. This is the main motion. It needs a seconder, correct? Okay. Now, a privileged motion is, for example, to fix time for a meeting, to adjourn a meeting, to recess, question of privilege. This is what I was referring to. You don't need to say what the question of privilege is, but it is a question. And call for the order of the day. What does call for the order of the day mean? So if any member from this assembly thinks that the meeting has gone into a whole different direction, they can raise their hand and say, I call for order of the day. Means, okay, what are we discussing right now? Where are we on the agenda? What's happening? And the chair needs to recognize that motion. The question of privilege is what I told you. That can be raised anytime during the meeting. It requires immediate attention, obviously, for obvious reasons. And mostly it does not need to be discussed. You will ask me, when does it need to be discussed? Well, if a person has a question of privilege 5 times in 10 minutes, then maybe it's not a question of privilege and they're trying to hijack the meeting, and then you discuss. But unless that happens, don't discuss a question of privilege. You don't want that information. And it's also, respecting the person's privacy. The president decides, the chair, or the chair decides if they ask for a vote. A point of information. I love the whole interrupting the meeting. Now, interrupting the meeting, it does not mean that somebody's speaking and you get up and start screaming. It means you raise your hand, and when you are called on, you say, I have a point of information. And you can do that at any point, but you still, interrupting doesn't mean somebody is in the middle of a sentence and you just start, yelling out. You just raise your hand and you say, I have a point of information, and that means you're asking for information. Sometimes, most of the time, it refers to the rules. So you will say, how many votes do we need for this motion? Or what does the Constitution say on this? Or what in that line of the budget, what does that mean? Again, interruptions are in an orderly way. All questions must be directed to the chairperson. I cannot state this enough. Discussions during GA amongst members, that is going to make the meeting go crazy. Members of an assembly speak to the chairperson. The chairperson gives people the speaking right. And it's the same with the points of information. So I've heard many times like, oh, but what does JCI Oompa Loompa do with their blah, blah, blah? No, that's not okay. That exchange is not okay. You can address to the chair saying, Chair, I would like to know what JCI Oompa Loompa had, last year, but don't exchange directly with the representative, because that makes the discussion adversary. You don't want to have the discussion adversary. You want the discussion to be constructive. A subsidiary motion is related to the main motion. For example, as Anna was mentioning, to lay the motion on the table, that means we're laying this on the table. We didn't decide on this. We will decide on this at a later date. If you don't mention when you will decide on this, at the next meeting, you need to first take all the motions that are on the table and discuss them before you discuss the things that are for that meeting. So either we say lay on the table for 2050, and that basically means I don't want to do what you guys want to do. Or you can say lay on the table, and that means at the next meeting, you take from the table, okay? A subsidiary motion is the motion to limit or close debate, or to postpone to a certain time. Motion to refer to a committee. That's my favorite motion in JCI. If you will see at an international level, I have used it myself at a national level. When a debate is not ending and you clearly don't want to force a vote because people have not yet decided, and it's clear that people feel strongly about this. If it's not, you can't refer this to a committee if it's essential for running the organization. You're going to have to force a vote. But if it's not essential, you can refer it to a committee, because remember, you're serving the whole organization, not just yourself. So you need to make sure that you move the motion forward. What does amend mean? Does anybody know? So for example, I put a motion, I want to allocate 500 euros to buy a new banner for the organization. Somebody can come in and say, well, I want to amend that motion, saying it's not going to be 500 euros, it's going to be 5,000 euros. I don't know. Basically, an amendment changes the motion. You always first vote on the amendment, and then you vote on the motion. You can't vote on the motion. And you vote on the motion as it was amended. Okay, not on the original motion. So let's say if I propose to allocate 500 euros for a banner, somebody says, no, I want to allocate 1,000. We vote if we allocate 1,000. We first vote if we amend the main motion. It passes, and then we vote to allocate 1,000. But first we allocate to amend. We don't allocate on the, should we allocate 1,000 or 500? It's very important to keep this rule in mind, because otherwise, again, people are like, oh, we have two motions. No, we don't. We have a main motion and an amendment. There are not two motions. Okay, and always remember the book. First close this, because the main point was that first close the subsidiary motions and the amendments. A subsidiary motion can be also the motion to postpone. The amendments must add something to the motion and cannot replace or oppose the main motion. It can't be something completely different. For example, no, I don't want to allocate 500 euros to a banner. I want to allocate 1,000 euro to a flower. That's a different motion. It's a completely different motion, right? That's not an amendment. So you first need to vote on the first motion, and then you discuss the second one. And an amendment, as I was saying, the book, you have to vote on the amendment before you vote on the amended motion if the amendment passes. I know that's a lot of information. In action, this is a lot easier than it seems. And if you want to rule the game at JCI and not feel like you don't know what the heck is happening in the room at Conference Assembly or at World Congress, I fully recommend that you run your meetings in your local organizations according to this rule, so you are all accustomed to this. The incidental motion, it's related to the procedure of the meeting, not related to the motion. Some must be voted and some can be decided by the president. You have a document that I will share with you, Parliamentary Procedure of JCI, that clearly states which needs to be voted on and what can be decided by the president. It is related to the procedures of the meeting in what way? If the quorum changed, right? And the secretary doesn't notice, you can raise your hand and say, Secretary, the quorum changed, our majorities are not the same, please state the new majorities, okay? Point of order, as was mentioned before, but different from the point of information, this is a point of order. If you see rules are being broken, you can raise your hand and point out what rules are being broken and what procedures are not followed. It requires immediate attention. So no matter what you are discussing right now, if the procedure is not followed, that takes precedence. You first discuss the procedure, and if it is followed or not, you go back into order and then you can proceed. Okay, now I will have, because I think, I hope I didn't lose all of you. I see we still have a strong presence. We're gonna look at some motions and we will together discuss which kind of motions they are. It is very, very important to understand how motions work, because otherwise you will either not be able to achieve what you want because you didn't know the rules and people outsmarted you, basically. Or second, you will make, if you're chairing and you don't know the rules, you will make people feel like they're not a part of the organization. When that happens, people leave and we end up with no members. Now let's put them into categories. Amend a motion. What kind of motion is this? Correct.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm sure because we are pressured by time, I will move forward a little bit faster. You got a little bit of taste of what motions are. We will share with you a table that JCI uses that clearly states the types of motion, the majority, if it needs a seconder, and how to decide on it. So when you run a meeting, don't think that you need to remember this stuff. Because I've seen a lot of people like, don't be a hero. You don't need to remember this stuff. Take the rule book with you, have the book of Robert's Rules of Order and Parliamentary Procedure, Constitution on the table. And if you're not sure, take your time, look at the rules, rather than go forward without meeting the rules. Take your time. Okay, the rules for debate. The debate is always limited to the topic of the motion. And you all can, as a chair, you can also always bring the meeting to order. The debate can be ended, but it requires a 2/3 majority to approve. This is something that refers to what was asked early in the session. Parliamentary procedure is about decision of majorities, but it does respect minorities by having these 2/3 motions, because you don't want an organization that has more than 50%, let's say, of voting power to say, okay, I don't want to talk about this anymore, everybody shut up, right? You don't want that to happen. And this is why you have 2/3 majorities, and 2/3 majorities are actually very hard to have. I don't know of any situation where one organization has a 2/3 majority by itself. I don't know, there might be, but I'm not aware of it. The rules for a closed debate: if you see that this is never ending, somebody can propose to close the debate. It needs 2/3, as I was saying, just because it protects the minority. If it's approved, everybody votes on the main motion. There's no discussion. So if there's a motion to end the debate, you first vote on the motion to end the debate, and then you move directly to voting on the main motion on the floor, okay? There's no ifs and buts. It passed, that it means you move forward. The rules for the speaker are very clear. Always direct your opinion to the chairperson. This is something that we've discussed in the past. I do the same when I do my trainings. I don't want people to engage in an adversary way with each other. So I ask people to direct their opinions and their points of view to me. So the chair should be very mindful. Before giving somebody a chance for a second time to speak, they should make sure that everybody who's speaking for the first time had a chance. So for example, if 5 of us raise our hands and 3 of us already spoke, you go to the 2 that haven't spoken, and then you go to the other 3. For participants, it's very important to follow procedure, to be visible. I've seen a lot of people in a room full of people sitting on chairs. Even if we're not many, it's very hard to notice who's speaking. If you're a chair, it's easier, but if you're in the room, it's not that easy. So stand up when you speak and wait your turn. That's hard for me to do too. I know I interrupt all the time. I'm the interrupting cow. I do that because sometimes I want to jump in and help people that are speaking. I do my meditations when I feel like I have to, but it's actually a great skill to let people speak, give everybody 1 minute so that you don't have endless speeches of, okay, the chairperson facilitates the debate, but does not take part of it in it. Remember, the chairperson doesn't get a vote. The members of the board don't vote in the General Assembly. So they can take part before the General Assembly has started. Once the General Assembly has started, the chairperson facilitates, they don't vote. There's one exception. When does the president vote? When it's equal. So when there are equal, you have 20 people present, 10 went one way and 10 the other way, the president can cast the vote. Now, that can only happen in one circumstance, at a national level, not when the president is a member. Because when the president is a member, they vote in the General Assembly, right? So they can't vote twice. So if in a local organization you have the situation of 50-50, you got to vote again. You know, the president doesn't get to vote because that would mean the president would get 2 votes. The chair always has to observe the rule and make sure that debate is fair. The chairperson can interrupt, unlike the members, right? They can interrupt a speaker if they want to bring the meeting to order. They don't just interrupt to say an impression or opinion, but if that person ran over time, if that person speaks off topic, so they don't just interrupt because they want to stop the person from speaking, but they interrupt to impose the rules. The voting methods, the consensus. I can't hate the consensus because it's very hard to achieve, but that's the hardest method. I don't recommend putting into your constitution needing a consensus on any decision because it's very hard to achieve. And then the vote with a voice that we use a lot in JCI, or when we say everybody in favor say yes, or you know, assembly or JCI, everybody opposed say whatever. A show of hands, that's also very common at a local level. I've seen it very often. And the secret vote. All elections are secret, except for one situation. Can anybody tell me what the situation is? It happens quite often. When we have one candidate, we usually use vote by acclamation. Now, to suspend the rules and to not have even when you have one candidate, to not have a secret vote, you need a motion. In JCI, you need consensus on that. If somebody opposes vote of acclamation, you have the secret vote. In national constitutions, you have 2/3 majority. What does that mean? You don't get to decide how you're going to vote. It's not the chair, not the board. Nobody decides that except for the General Assembly. For election, it is always secret unless you decide by a 2/3 majority otherwise. But you need a 2/3 majority because there might be situations, I have experienced it in my life, where there was one candidate and they weren't elected. And the vote is nominal, vote one by one. What does that mean? I ask you, for example, Christina, how do you vote? And you say yes or no or against or for. And then I go to Elena. And usually with the more sensitive votes, it happens to be a nominal vote, not an election vote. But no, if you vote to disaffiliate an organization, for example, it's a sensitive vote. So people will choose to do a nominal vote. Always ask in the following order: who votes in favor first, and then who votes against. Usually you don't need to ask for abstentions. Whoever didn't vote for or against is abstaining, clearly. Otherwise, what are they doing? Because there's no other option, right? I have seen people ask for abstentions. That's fine as well, but just make sure when you take the minutes that the total is not more than the possible total. The voting majorities, the simple majority is the majority of those present, as that's 50% plus one of those present in the room with a quorum. Absolute majority is 50% of everybody who can vote. So even if they're absent. If an organization has 25 members, 20 are present, simple majority is 11, absolute majority is 14. A majority of 2/3, very important. This is usually refers to the rules. President Brian told me something to remember all these 2/3. When is it 2/3? When it is 50%? And he said this way: when you give something, you need 50%. When you take something, you need 2/3. This is an easy rule. When you take somebody's rights, when there's a rule and you take the rule out, you need 2/3. When you take something, it has to be 2/3, okay? Unanimous. In JCI, if you want to suspend the rules, you need unanimous vote. That's at JCI International. Of course, at a national level, everybody has very different rules. In closing, most people that I have heard in the past that said that you don't need parliamentary procedure ended up in a situation where they needed it, they didn't know what to do, and they got shorthanded. I know that you feel like in JCI we're all friends, and we are all volunteering, and we are, but learning these rules in practice will help you throughout life. In my experience, I have ended up being a general city councillor. I still chair meetings of board meetings in corporate environment of big, large companies. These are the rules they follow. There are no other rules. This is not something that's only unique to JCI, but you get an opportunity to learn these rules in a safe environment in JCI, and then you will learn them and be able to implement them forever. I know when I joined this big company and they were all speaking English and they were running their meetings according to parliamentary procedure, I was the only one that instantly felt comfortable. I knew what was happening due to JCI. Mastering meetings only happens in practice. See this is a development opportunity that JCI offers. This is how you need to present it to members for the reason we're running meetings. We have an opportunity to, drink and have fun after the meeting, but during the meeting, this is a learning opportunity, and we are all supposed to follow them. Also, fair decisions. Ethics is debatable from a cultural standpoint, from our backgrounds. Morality is debatable. What is moral to one person is immoral to another. This is why we have rules. Fairness in JCI is if something was according to the rule. If it's according to the rule, then it's fair. Everything else is a philosophical conversation that has its own place, but not in meetings. What is the order of applying the rules? So the first is the international treaty. That means for countries such as ours, for example, NATO, right? That is above national law. That is the biggest rule. So if something in your national law is contradictory to an international treaty, your national law doesn't matter. The international treaty matters if your country signed it. For example, the International Treaty of Human Rights. If your country signed it, you can't put in your national constitution torturing people because you signed an international treaty. Then it's national law. So no matter how we want to do things, we cannot go against our national law. If in Romania things are done in a certain way, we cannot vote in JCI to do things differently, just because national law is above everything that we can decide. And that means also how we register the documents that we need to supply to the government to register our organization. That's not up to us. That's the government tells us, you need this, 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 this. Everything else, it's up to you, right? So national law, then local law. An example for local law, for example, let's say that in a city, you cannot put flyers, or I've heard in Singapore, you can't chew gum. So you can't make a decision in JCI that breaks local law. You can't make a decision, oh, we're going to put flyers everywhere. No, in this city, it's illegal. And then is the JCI International Constitution. For example, the age of a JCI member can only be 18 to 40. No matter what you decide on a national and local level, you are not a JCI member if you're over 40. That is according to the JCI Constitution. Then is the National Constitution. Again, if something is specified in the National Constitution, it's above the local Constitution. You cannot have something in the local Constitution that contradicts the National Constitution. But the National Constitution cannot put something that contradicts the JCI International Constitution. And then after the JCI local constitution, we have the parliamentary procedure, and after the JCI's booklet that we will share. And after that, that's the big book of Robert's Rules of Order. You cannot make a constitution on a local or national level that covers all the situations. The situations are many. So our constitutions would be like Bibles. We can't do that. So this is why the rule is the following. If the international treaty doesn't say something about it, then you look in national law. If the national law doesn't say something about it, you look in local law. If local law doesn't say something about it, you don't go to the JCI International Constitution. If you can't find it there, you go to the National Constitution. If you can't find it there, you go to the local constitution. If you can't find it there, you go to the parliamentary procedure. If you can't find it there, you go to Robert's Rules of Order. If you can't find it there, tell me what it is, because I'm curious. It has to be something really, really special. But mostly, those are the rules that you always, always, always have to keep in mind. I want to thank everybody for attending. I know it's a lot of information. Mostly what matters is for you to implement this. And when you do it, you will have a lot of more questions than you do right now. Feel free to reach out and let me know if you have had any trouble or any questions that, as I mentioned, are not covered in all those wonderful documents. Thank you so much, Elena, for your support, and for Christina for setting this up.